Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy, and I'm so pleased to have Indi Young here to talk with. Thanks for joining me, Indi.
Hi, Edwin. Hope everything's going well today.
Yeah, it is going well, especially going well being able to talk with you. I've just been seeing all the work that you've been doing around empathy, and really excited to talk to you about what you've been doing on. And perhaps I should introduce you first. I just took some material here from your website, and it says you're an expert consultant in user experience, offering your services in empathy research, strategy, redesign to organizations around the world. And you have a new book out called, let me see if I can put that up on the screen here. Yay, it worked. Practical Empathy. By way of introduction, would you like to say some more just to introduce yourself?
Let's see, what could I say to introduce myself? I've been really focused on this whole topic for my, I don't know, 20 years of my career. I started out as a software engineer. Only recently has empathy become quite the buzzword, especially within the design community and within organizations. Also, I've just heard from the DevOps community, and they're very interested in empathy. So everybody's using this word, but there isn't a lot of sort of clarity on understanding exactly what it means. So the book that I wrote is all about making it usable, reliable, and something that you can sort of not get laughed at by your peers within a corporation, where sometimes empathy is taken to just mean, oh, you know, I can understand your emotions. So there's a lot more to it, and that's what I'm trying to get going.
Okay, well, how can people contact you? Is your website still indiyoung.com? Is that the main gateway?
That's the place, and I tweet at Indi Young.
Well, one thing I've noticed, looking at your work, is that you really throw yourself into something. It seems like you worked on something called mental models, which I think is. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, just by way of some of your background work. But that's where you hear what people's experiences, and you create these models, as I understand it. I think they're also called empathy maps, and I think there might be an overlap. But what I've noticed is when you throw yourself into something, I mean, you really go to the to the extreme. You've got these incredible mental models that you've and processes. And so I imagine if you do the same for empathy, really, that it'll be really quite something, because I've just noticed that you throw yourself into things like that.
Well, thanks, Edwin. Yeah, I actually encounter a lot of people who have that same sort of ability in work. A lot of people are very passionate about what they do and about how they want to change things. So I'm definitely not unique. And the mental model diagrams, like I said, empathy has just recently become quite this buzzword, but all along what I have been focused on is not necessarily trying to, and a mental model diagram is slightly different than an empathy map, but what I'm focused on is trying to understand what a person's reasoning is, what's going on in the neurons, not from a cognitive perspective or a neuroscience perspective, but just from a perspective of understanding, like, what are all the false starts and the double checking your work, or not feeling sure about this decision? What motivates you? What did you hear? How did that fall into the mix? And it's all about those thoughts that are flying through your head and those reactions that you're having to certain situations that I'm interested in. And the mental model diagram, the top half of it actually represents that. Generally speaking, for several different behavioral audience segments. Sometimes the behaviors are so different that those go into separate models, but usually they'll fall into one model, and then I use that diagram to help an organization understand how well they're supporting their people, whether it's strong support or weak support, whether there are gaps, whether there are opportunities, or whether there are just areas that people are doing some thinking that particular organization doesn't need to support or feel intentional about. So it's really just clarifying all of that and helping people, especially startups, understand the direction and the pathways that they could follow. But I do this at all sorts of different levels, in higher ed, in very Fortune 500 corporations, and very sort of industrial areas as well. And it's all about just being able to get a handle on and confidence about the efforts that you're making. Generally, this all gets started in the user experience arena within an organization, but that isn't necessary. It can also get started through product management. It can also get started through these new customer insight roles that people are playing or bringing up within an organization. So the idea is just to instill clarity and then confidence in your decision making. And the book, the Practical Empathy book, is basically re-explaining all of that upper part of the mental model diagram. It's re-explaining how to listen to someone and use listening as a skill, rather than jumping into the idea of, oh, I want to walk in somebody's shoes. When you say the word empathy, the one thing most people can agree upon is that it means to walk in somebody's shoes. And then there's all sorts of dissension about, oh, it's all about emotions. Yeah, emotions, it's all about the heart. What I'm focused on is cognitive empathy, which is not necessarily feeling what other people are feeling, but understanding what other people are thinking and reasoning. And a part of that is your reactions. I purposely don't use the word feelings because within corporate America, within industry, within a lot of different groups, the word feelings isn't received very well. Whereas the word reactions, that has solid footing. That's believable and not laughable, right? One of the words I hear people saying is, oh, it's like a little fuzzy bunny, right?
The feelings part?
Yeah, exactly. So let's not go there. So what I try to emphasize is the idea that within your work, hey, this stuff can be serious, and it can be all about understanding how another person is reasoning his way toward a specific intent or purpose that he's trying to achieve. Outside of, and this is the key difference, this is the hard part, outside of what your organization provides. Now this is, of course,
maybe I should just say how I was kind of understanding. So far I was understanding that if I'm reading your book and kind of going through, you have some videos as well, presentations that you've done around this topic, is that corporations might be, or businesses might be, kind of jumping into solutions. Like, here's a problem, we want to go jump to this solution. And you're saying that instead of just jumping into solutions, you really need to hear and empathize and listen to what people's experiences are, so that you can really solve the real problems that they have, instead of just maybe ideas that you have. You really want to hear what the real needs of the people you're designing for are, and that's where you need, in your book you're using the term an empathetic mindset. So you're wanting that we have to create this empathetic mindset as a way of relating to the customers, or even within an organization for doing collaboration and so forth. So, and then you go through the book basically how to kind of create this empathetic mindset. Is that kind of, am I getting that?
Two things. Thing one is the phrase killer idea. It's worshipped. The idea that you could have, the concept that you could have an idea that you could take to market and make millions of dollars, or take to market and get prototyped and have somebody buy you up and make millions of dollars, has been sort of the holy grail of especially the software industry for a couple decades. And venture capitalists may, because their purpose is to make a good investment for their investors, they're not maybe focused so much on how you are supporting a person with your killer idea, right? I mean, sure, it needs to work so that you can make money and make that big transaction happen. But I think we're moving beyond that. Sure, it's been fine for the past couple of decades. So the second part of that is broaden your understanding. Sure, a killer idea has roots. It generally has roots in an experience that you've had or someone close to you has had. And those are valid roots, but I see a lot of startups go out there thinking those roots apply to everybody. Like everybody's really interested in getting exactly the right room at the hotel. And maybe that isn't true of everybody, and they forget that. And so their play, it doesn't become the big monetary transaction that they'd hoped for, because they weren't necessarily broadening their scope and understanding that they could support more people who don't necessarily have those same roots. So just the clarity of knowledge, being able to broaden your understanding of what people are thinking and how their behaviors are different and what those different behavioral audience segments are, and you can make a solid decision. It's like, yeah, we're supporting this behavioral audience segment, not that one. Here's all the ways that we're supporting it. Here's the little place where we're not supporting them, but that's purposeful. We have a reason for our decisions. And then we're getting a more realistic understanding of what that market is as well.
So it's kind of a person-centered, where you're kind of, I saw you had a model of instead of an idea-centered, where you just have an idea and you're working at kind of testing out the idea, you really want to connect with people and how people are and hear who they are. And it's almost as if you hear them and you're bringing them into yourself, in a sense, into your decision-making and your creativity. So when you have creativity, that you're really holding, I don't know what the word would be, presence, or the quality of the person that you're designing for. And it sounds like you're also saying to have a variety of people that you're doing this for, too.
So what I think of it is not as an instead. I think instead is the wrong word. It is in addition or broadening, like I was saying, right? And the way that I characterize it is that really all you're doing is putting knowledge into your brain. You're lining the inside of your skull with these different understandings and these different kinds of behavioral audience segments that you gather these understandings and this knowledge through deep listening sessions. And at some point we should talk about the other half of this, but the knowledge isn't going to cause you to make certain decisions or invent new ideas, but as you are being creative, when you are, having that idea pop out, it's going to be fed from broader set of roots than just the narrow set of roots that you would normally have. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do. It's a little bit more like, if you're a gardener trying to prepare the soil, because if you don't prepare the soil, then you put a gorgeous tomato plant in there, and it's going to give you, like 4 or 5 tomatoes. And in San Francisco or Berkeley, those 4 or 5 tomatoes won't show up until the end of September. But if you prepare the soil with a lot of nutrients and a lot of things that those tomatoes need, and bring a little bit more warmth to that tomato plant, then they're going to give you tomatoes in San Francisco in July, and they're going to give you 50 tomatoes instead of just the 5. So there's sure the tomato plant that gave you 4 or 5 tomatoes. This is a hilarious analogy. I don't know if it's going to work very well for folks in business, but that tomato plant is productive, but it's not lush and out of this world, right? So that's what I'm talking about, is that your ideas can become, tenfold greater, tenfold more productive, tenfold broader, understanding, like we're going to do this particular service for this particular audience segment, or maybe these two behavioral audience segments, and then we'll do a completely different one for that behavioral audience segment.
So the tomatoes might be more nutritious as well. I mean, have more vitamins and minerals and good things for you like that.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah. The second half of this that I sort of referenced there is being able to collaborate with people that you work with better. And this all goes back to the main key, which is being able to listen. And so we've all been in situations where, there's this, you've got a great idea, you're trying to make it happen, but there's someone who's just sort of putting up barriers. And you start having uncharitable thoughts about that person, right, at work. And you stop trying. Maybe you give up entirely. Maybe you haven't even met this person. Maybe you've tried to only communicate via email, and the email just isn't a broad enough medium for you to understand, or for that other person to understand the nuances of what you're saying. And so the idea is to, hey, let me go listen to this person, because there's a human brain there, and that human brain is not, intentionally only coming to work to thwart your ideas. That human brain has, decades of background that has helped him formulate the way he thinks and the way he makes decisions. And it's really helpful to just sit down and try to explore that, understand it. Where are these decisions coming from? It can be difficult, and someone tweeted me just the other week saying, she tried and the guy started yelling at her. Like, okay, yeah, at some point, maybe giving up, but trying again, another few months later. The idea is to come at it, though, with this, there's a whole bunch of guidelines, but the idea of a blank mind, the mind that, hey, while we've all been taught over our entire careers to demonstrate to the other person how smart we are, right, in order to get a job, in order to get a promotion, in order to get that project that you want, in this case, you want to blank that all out and come in completely naive. Put yourself in a vulnerable position to the other person in terms of, like, not needing to state your intelligence and say, hey, listen, I don't need to state my intelligence, this is you inside your head, because I actually don't know a damn thing about this other person's way of thinking. I'm walking into it blind, I'm walking into it blank, and I just want that person to explain, how did he do this reasoning? Where did that reasoning come from? What are the guiding principles it's based on? How did that come about? Like 10 years ago on some project that he started where he changed the way he was thinking. And just that act of opening yourself up, making yourself vulnerable for that other person, lets that other person accept you a little bit more, and lets that other person open up to you. And it allows you to absorb that person's way of thinking, so that now, as you're working with this person on the next step, or in another 2 months when you're trying to do another great idea, you have a much better idea of how to change your idea to fit the way he's going to think. Right?
So how's that worked? How does that work for you? Or was there more? Or
No.
I was just kind of wondering, like, how has that worked for you personally? Because sometimes it's easy to kind of have the model, wow, let's go listen, but I'm just wondering, how has it been your experience? And because I know for myself, sometimes if I go and try to listen, it's like I feel so frustrated and I'm in such pain or something myself that I don't have, like, the space to listen, and the practicality of it can be difficult. I'm just wondering, what's been your personal experience around that?
Well, I somehow I have managed to step over that threshold through a lot of practice, and I actually end up with so it's my natural reaction to try to say, oh, wait, sorry, like, let me understand what you're thinking. And I actually have a physiological response as I'm getting into this, and as that person opens up, my eyes start watering. It's close to like crying, but it's not. It's this totally weird physiological response, but it's just sort of that. I think it signifies that relief that we both decided to go ahead and try a little harder to understand. That other person agreed to let me listen to them, and that I thought to, oh, maybe I do need to take this moment to spend a little bit more time with this person, understand what this person is thinking. And this has happened to me lots. It's usually where I feel as if someone is being aggressive, or someone is being thoughtless, and these are, those are my reactions to it. And so then my programmed response is to sort of get into this listening session with them. I mean, it can just be like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, nothing big. I'm not talking about let's set this date up, 2 weeks in advance and get on.
This is simple listening, being more saying, okay, I need to listen to this person, and you just go and listen for that whatever time you have.
It's in the moment. It's definitely in the moment. You might be walking down the hall, you might be standing up after a meeting, right? And the meeting, there's been a little bit of contention, or what you felt maybe a little tension about or something. You just sort of hang out while that person's packing up his laptop or whatever, and say, hey, I'm not sure, or you can say it this way, it's like, I'd really like to try to understand better what your thinking was behind that, or what your reasoning is there. And not in an aggressive or confrontational way. Make it sound like I said, I need to try harder. So it's on me, it's my responsibility, it's me sort of saying, I'm bowing down before you, not literally, right? But it's like, I am presenting myself as a person who is not attacking and simply trying to gather more information. And the person may attack you because, you're baring your neck. But they're not going to attack for long, and that's the point at which, when they start talking about their reasoning and how human it is and how logical it is, usually. I haven't run into too many completely psychotic explanations, so I've been lucky that way, and I fully recognize that there could be some coworker that you have who just doesn't have logical reasoning according to you and your group, in which case it's not, it's probably not something that a practical empathy can help with. But that's the point, when that person starts talking about the logic of it, and explaining how this thinking came out of this other project that they were working on or something, and how purposeful they've been about the way that they're making their decisions, that you start building your respect for this person.
Well, one thing I've noticed in you talk about an empathic mindset, and you've used the words like reason and logic, and I was also hearing that you're kind of using this vocabulary because you feel that businesses aren't going to go into the more feeling realm. That's kind of what I was hearing there. Yeah. And for myself, I actually come from the opposite direction, where we actually start with the feelings, we start with the felt experience. So I've tried to, I don't know, I've just noticed that difference in terms of your approach and my approach, and the direction you're going with, an empathic mindset. I use the word an empathic way of being, which is like a more whole felt sense. So I don't know. It's I'm just noticing that as a difference. I'm wondering how that kind of resonates with you.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think your approach is perfect. But there's behavioral audience segments that you have as well, right? And the behavioral audience segment that is the sort of, I'm working at a job, I'm a serious person, I have all these credentials, and you know, the emotion just doesn't come into it. Stay out of my personal life. My personal life is fine. This is work. It's different. And it's all very, you know, serious, and there's reasons for things, and you know, money on the line and stuff, and so that's just a different behavioral audience segment that I'm talking to. That's all.
Would it be fair to say that you're wanting to kind of meet people where they are? That people have a certain way of being in terms of, well, it's all reason, logic. You know, we have competition efficiency. That you want to speak to them with their language and kind of meet them where they are? Is that
because they're, yes, exactly it. If they were approached by someone like you who was saying, you know, it's a empathetic life sort of sphere, and let's start with the emotions, then they're going to go woo woo woo. They're going to ignore you and not listen and not try it, right? Whereas it's actually a very you can do it just in work. You don't have to let it affect anything else. It doesn't have to be thought of as spiritual at all. And in a lot of these cases, the whole logic versus spiritual thing is a division, right? And so, yes, I'm just trying to use the words that are going to resonate with the behavioral audience segment that I'm approaching.
There's another concept I could throw out too that has really resonated with me in terms of empathy, something called transactional empathy and transformational empathy. I'm just wondering if you've heard of that term, but the transactional empathy is that we start, I mean, there are different philosophical worldviews that we build our life on, and one of them is we're all in it for ourselves. We're, you know, greedy, selfish, self-interested people, and you know, if I can dominate you like in a authoritarian world, you do what I tell you to. That's kind of like one way. The other way, I mean, at one extreme, the other is, well, we need enough empathy for me to get what I want from you and you to get what you want from me. But we still know that we're selfish, self-interested people. We need enough empathy to, you know, kind of solve this problem so we can go on our merry way. And so there's the empathy kind of fits into this transaction that we have. Then there's this notion of transformative empathy, that we really want an empathic way of being, or a value of shared empathy between us, that we're really trying to create this empathic relationship where I hear where you are, you hear where I am, and if we have differences, we keep going deeper and deeper into our experience until we find a shared common humanity, so that there's been this transformation of this separateness, that we've become have this shared experience. And you know, I've done like mediation in my family where a fight starts and people think it's about one issue. But you get really deep down into it, it's like it's about a need for belonging, you know, and then we understand our common need for belonging, and there's like this transformation that happens. So that's been just a concept or a framework I've been playing around or just looking at and find just very helpful. I'm just wondering how that resonates or what comes up for you around that.
I think it's not for the audience segment that I'm looking at, but it sounds like a great framework. Definitely.
Okay. So it's kind of in business. They're not going to be necessarily in that.
That's not a part of business. Yeah.
Yeah.
The collaborative relationship is not. It's not a relationship like what you pick with your friends. Or that you inherit with your family. It's a whole different kind of relationship. You're inheriting it in a way because you're becoming a part of a larger team through the threshold of being hired to do something, right? But it's I haven't really explored this, but I don't think that the goal is the bigger goal that the whole organization has. I mean, take, for example, a nonprofit. They may have a larger goal of, I don't know, let's say reducing cancer risk in children. And so everybody's aiming at that goal. And that goal is kind of what dictates a lot of what the relationships are about. There's the word culture in companies is also a kind of a buzzword these days, and a lot of people, I'm not writing about it myself, but a lot of people are, and culture is something that's, some people throw up their hands, they're like, oh, this, it is what it is, you can't affect it. And then other people are like, oh no, yes, you can definitely affect it and change it for the better. But oftentimes cultures are not gardened, they are wild.
They just emerge. Over time, they've just kind of unconsciously, you're just kind of emerged.
Yeah, exactly. So I think people find themselves in these kinds of scenarios, and if it's a weird wild that they don't get along with, then they're going to leave that organization. But a lot of companies are starting to cultivate their culture. They're starting to garden their culture. There, we use the analogy again. This is becoming a thing. And I think that greatly affects the way an employee collaborates with another employee. Or even with a vendor, right, or something, some sort of relationship there. You've got these bigger goals that you're trying to achieve, but those aren't necessarily a part of the daily lingua franca that you're using. You're more driven by deadlines. You're more driven by budgets. You're more driven by, trying to compete for that other project or that other position, or trying to make space so that you can get the rec for another hire as opposed to that other group getting the rec for the hire. It's different, and it feels, just as stressful as real life. But there's, I think, this aspect that everybody's going to scratch each other's back and everybody's going to try to make room to empathize with everybody else isn't necessarily going to fly. That's too big. I think it has to be practical. It has to be small. It has to be one little thing that you can do. And the one little thing that I'm talking about using in your work is listening. That's it.
So really focusing on the listening part, becoming a better listener.
Yeah, becoming a better listener. The other thing that I say about the empathic mindset is it's something that you're not in most of the time. You fall into it when necessary. Like when I was describing about, if there was contention at a meeting, I'll hang out afterwards and fall into that mindset and try to understand that other person. I choose to put on that mindset. But most of the time I'm not in that mindset. Like right now, I'm not necessarily in that mindset because we're doing something else which is more explanatory, so that our listeners can maybe get something out of it.
So one thing I've looked at is empathic listening as well. I don't know if you've looked at the work of Carl Rogers and have you heard of Carl Rogers? Well, he's a therapist or psychologist and therapist who is ranked up around with like Freud and so forth, and is one of the most popular clinical therapists in the United States. And he did his work on empathic listening primarily, and what they called a person-centered approach of just deep listening and using kind of a reflective listening approach. So anyway, it's in terms of a listening, that's one listening approach that I've seen that is immensely useful and helpful, and it's been used in therapy, but it's also very effective in mediation, for example.
Right.
So I'm just wondering what other listening, kind of how, if you're looking about creating more listening, what are you looking at for how to do that? Let
me just say one thing about those words. Remember how we're talking about our two different audience segments, or two or three or four or five different behavioral audience segments. You said therapy and you said mediation. And if you went into a business scenario, therapy would be ignored. Therapy, don't need it. Mediation would be paid attention to. Right? There's a purpose for mediation. And so just just those it's just
Yeah.
vocabulary, right? Yeah.
Different vocabulary has
Yeah.
different meanings attached to it, and some
Yeah.
people have a negative reaction. I
Yeah.
have a negative reaction to therapy, and I try to not to use it
Right.
myself
Right.
for
Okay.
that
Yeah.
reason. I just
Yeah.
wanted to give a context to Carl
Yeah.
Rogers
Yeah.
and his listening approach.
Yeah.
But
Excellent.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I haven't read about him. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any of that background, nor do I claim any of those credentials. But it sounds very similar to what I'm talking about, and it is. It is what I talk about in listening is trying to get past the predisposition, especially in Western culture, to talk about our opinions and our preferences. These things are exalted in our media, and so that becomes what we speak about. And we have very high-level, lightweight conversations about our preferences and opinions, and then we delve into explanations, right? So I want to get past those. I want to get down to the actual reasoning that's going through somebody's head. As an example, I was doing this, just practicing, chatting with some guy who had organized a Design Writers Summit. And it was lunch, and I was just chatting with him, and can't remember how we got on the subject, but he liked certain kinds of champagne. He had decided to make himself an expert in champagne, and I was trying to get him to explain to me why he had gotten involved in champagne. He started talking about a job he had at a coffee roasters. And at the coffee roasters, he learned how to do different kinds of roasting of coffee, and he ended up explaining to me how to roast coffee. And as hard as I tried to find out, well, what's the reasoning behind this, he wouldn't actually say it. But later, when I reflected back to him, I said, you're trying to tell me this because you think it's really important for everybody to have the best experience they can with their sense of taste. And you want to explain to them how they can experiment and how the different options are out there. And he's like starting to nod, and then he's nodding vigorously. It's like, yeah, that's his driving purpose. That's his intent, is to help everybody else, experiment and open up and broaden their sense of taste. And there's probably more to it there, but that's an example of how our usual conversations go, right? You chat with your best friend, with your significant other. How was your day? Oh, great. I had a meeting. Okay, blah, blah, blah. This is all just statement of fact. None of it is getting down into the reasoning. It's when you get down into the reasoning that you really connect. So another example of that is my mom is having glaucoma surgery coming up this week, I guess. And she was talking to me over the phone on the weekend and repeatedly said something about the surgery, which made me start to sort of clue in. I'm like, are you concerned about the surgery? She's like, no. And she says, well, yeah. And then she starts telling me how she's a little concerned that it may turn out that it blinds her in that eye because a friend of hers was blinded and by glaucoma surgery, and then later on it was turned around, but she's still nervous about it and everything. And so I finally got to sort of hear what was going on inside of her brain and inside of her heart, as opposed to, glaucoma surgery, glaucoma, it's happening, statement of fact, explanation. The doctor told me this, explanation, opinion, I think everybody should do it, whatever it is. We're all staying up at that really high, thin level, and it isn't until that you ask a little bit deeper questions that you start getting that connection. What's running through the brain, what's running through the stream of consciousness.
So that's as I'm hearing here, it's that you're interested in the reason or the connections that people have, or that you're saying that there's a superficial kind of reasoning people have, and you're really wanting to go deeper into it and find what are those associations and connections people have with their situation, like your mother. She's having this surgery. and what are all the different, I would use the word feelings, but that are thoughts that you have connected to this, and you were hearing some kind of fear and anxiety at a deeper level, perhaps, of losing her vision, and that you're wanting to look at that, you're wanting to explore that, almost like a constellation of and how those experiences connect with each other.
Yeah, both of those examples are not business oriented, but yes. Does that sort of listening relate to what Rogers talks about?
Yeah, Rogers would basically, someone would come in and he would just listen to what they're saying, and he would only reflect what he's hearing. So for a whole hour, it's only, well, I'm here. He sees empathy as accompanying someone on their journey in a non-directive way, that you're not like, you don't even ask questions to try to direct them. You don't try to analyze them. You don't judge them. You just follow step by step wherever you want to go. One metaphor I heard, which I think is similar, it's like the poet Virgil accompanying Dante into the levels of heaven and hell. And he's got his hand over Dante's shoulder in the book, Dante's Inferno, and he accompanies. He doesn't tell him where to go or whatever. He just says, "I'm with you. I'm present with you. Let's go wherever you want to go." So
that's exactly it. Yeah, yeah. I like the Dante and Virgil analogy. The analogy I use often is tour guide. If you go on a tour in a foreign city, you're paying attention to what the tour guide has things the tour is about and some histories to relate. And if you happen to pass by something that you're really interested in, you don't interrupt the tour to say, "Oh, hey, could you tell me what you know about this?" Like, we're passing a jewelry shop, and I'm really into jewelry, so you tell me about jewelry. The tour guide may never have even bought a piece of jewelry before, but they're going to try to answer your question because you asked it. And yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about. Is that you just want to follow.
You're really wanting to accompany the person. In your case, you're looking at, within a business context, that you're wanting to really follow the customers. What is it that's kind of alive or up for them, and kind of going deeper. So in terms of methodologies, the methodology he used was reflective listening. I will only just reflect what you're saying to accompany you, and it's basically, am I still on the right path? Am I still with you? It's kind of like, oh, I'm hearing you say this. Is this accurate? So it's just an asking for, like, am I still with you? And I'm just wondering, how are you looking at that? How are you accompanying that person? I mean, there's some things you're kind of like maybe asking an initial question, or how are you doing that accompaniment? Are you doing like in design they have, ask the 5 whys, why this, why that, why that, which is very effective. So I'm just wondering what the approach you're using.
I let people use whatever approach is going to work for them, but yes, you do start with a sort of an initial question, or even just an initial statement of what the scope is that you're trying to explore. So for instance, hey, you just took a trip to Boston. Tell me about, that air travel. And that's the statement of the scope, and that person's going to bring up all the things that are important to him about that particular air travel trip to Boston. And just about the air travel, not, oh yeah, what I did in Boston kind of thing. So you start with just a scope statement, and you can do reflection, you can do the whys. Often I'll do the because it means why, but it isn't as sometimes why can sound judgmental. Like, why did you do that? What were you thinking? Right?
That'll put people off.
So you're trying not to put people off. You do the reflecting, but above all, you're trying to, at the same time, keep a litmus test of whether you have understood this person at a deeper level. That litmus test of, like, are we still up in the explanation area, the area of preferences and opinions and statements of fact, or are we a little bit below that? And you're constantly trying to get a little bit below that. And there's going to be a little bit of warm-up in the beginning as the person, you know, decides whether or not they want to trust you. Or there could be that part in the beginning in the conference room, as describing, where the person wants to attack you and goes ahead and does it because it feels good. Let it happen. And then, you know, that person will open up eventually, and you'll get to hear a little bit more of the reasoning that's below it, theoretically.
Yeah, is that through questions? Like I'm hearing you're setting the scope, like, oh, you just took this trip, or you're going to have eye surgery. You know, what's coming up for you around that? What's the next?
You do ask questions, but only at the spur of the moment, in the moment, and only because you don't feel as if you've understood the deeper reasoning behind something. So, you know, can you give me an example of that? What were you thinking during the last time you were doing that? You know, how did you react, right? Sounds like your reaction, you know, blah, 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 and, you know, you don't even have to say that much, and you don't have to actually end it with a question mark. I think the most effective way of doing it is to just say part of what that person was talking about, and maybe add the word because, or even just part of what that person was talking about, and the person can sense that you need more explanation of what was going on. When you say, give me an example, or run me through an example of that, you're giving them this is actually an important tip, you're giving them the ability to actually relate what specifically went through their head, as opposed to a generality. The generalities are almost like conjecture. You can't really trust them. You really need to know, you know, in specific situations, in specific cases, and you can make, you know, a judgment for yourself whether, in general, this person acts this way. But you know, you don't need to in the moment. In the moment, you just need to pay attention. The other thing that I tell people that's really contentious is do not take notes, because in most corporate research, it's all about note-taking. And some people do their sense-making through the notes, and that's fine. That's just to have afterwards. Don't do it during the session. During the session, you need 100% of your brain activity to follow that person and decide that constant litmus test of whether you have gotten deeper. Record it. If this is a spur-of-the-moment thing after the conference, you can scribble down some notes afterwards. If you are doing this formally, you'll have the recording, which you can pour over to your heart's delight, and make sense of it that way. And I have this whole chapter in the book about sense-making, and how it makes you a better listener. So, so that contentious point about not taking notes during the moment is for a real purpose, and I think that when you try it, people who are used to only being able to make sense of things as they are taking notes may feel a little bit naked at first, but because they know they can do this afterwards, I think it'll be fine. I haven't necessarily heard from somebody doing that, but everybody that I have heard from has said that doing the sense-making of the transcript makes them far better at listening.
How about having someone else that takes notes? Or are you saying just don't have anybody there taking notes, or
no,
just
you could.
You yourself as an interviewer don't take notes?
If you have a third person taking notes, that person is playing the role of a recording. So record it and get it transcribed. It doesn't matter really, except that that rapport that you want to build with that person needs to be one-to-one. And if you make them aware of another person constantly there, then it's not one-to-one. So that's why I think a recording is a better way of capturing that. But if it's impossible, sure, get a third person. If that person is going to be co-located, with you, because I actually do most of these remotely, but if that person's going to be co-located with you, have them turn the opposite direction. They can still hear, but not be part of the conversation, not be a part of that one-to-one duo.
Do you have like a peak interview that you've done? Like, one, if you look back on your history of all the interviews you've done, like, oh man, I just really hit this one out of the park, the ballpark. This was like a really great interview.
I'm going to answer with a generalization. They're the good ones. The ones that feel good are the ones where the person who's doing the speaking, to whom I'm listening, gets excited about finally having someone who's interested in their thought process and starts exploring things that they hadn't necessarily made concrete in their brain yet. And so those are the very best ones because they're getting something out of it too. They're getting something very valuable out of it.
They're like really appreciating your presence so that they can explore their own thought process, and there's like a real joy that comes out of it for them. And it sounds like you actually are enjoying the enjoyment that you're kind of
yeah, definitely. I like supporting people, and so if it's valuable to them that way, that's great.
Well, that's one thing I think that gets overlooked with empathy. Sometimes it's like, well, empathy is you want to help people, and you're using empathy to get the information so you can create something to help them with, or with compassion, the person is suffering, so you gotta have compassion for them so you can alleviate their suffering. But that very part, that exactly what you're talking about, that your presence of being there for that person was actually contributing to their well-being and to their joy just by you offering empathy. That one, it sounds like they have the joy of the discovery of their own internal self, as well as the sense of that sense of connection, not being alone in the world. So I think just the act of empathy itself has huge benefits in that sense.
Well, one of the things that I like to clarify too is that walking in someone's shoes is applying empathy. And so many cases we don't take the time to develop empathy. And taking the time to listen to somebody is developing empathy. That's the thing that is so rare, that makes it so joyous when someone really is listening to you, right?
That you're seeing a difference between listening and walking in someone else's shoes.
Oh yeah, developing empathy is very different than applying empathy. Yeah, two different parts of the brain, probably. I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist.
There's an awful lot to. I mean, it's a big topic, but there's that kind of listening to someone is actually the effective empathy for me. I mean, there's this whole thing of everybody's defining everything differently, and it's so confusing, which you address in one of your other videos. And then there's this notion of cognitive empathy, which is some kind of seen as some mental process. But for me, cognitive empathy is really like an imaginative empathy. It's like a role playing, that instead of I can be listening to you, I can be feeling as I'm dialoguing with you, I'm learning and hearing more and kind of accompanying you on your journey or of who you are and what you're thinking and feeling. But I could take on the role myself of an imaginative empathy and say, oh, I am Indi, and what am I feeling? I'm feeling a little anxious, I'm feeling kind of spacious, or I could be so anyway, those are two very different parts. One is really being present with you, and the other one is imagining I'm in your situation as an imaginative role-playing, like an actor does. Meryl Streep or someone is just like miraculous at how she can put herself into somebody's role. So that seems
exactly
to be
the difference between developing empathy and applying empathy.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're saying, you're calling that developing empathy, that imagining kind of
No,
role-making?
the imagining is applying it.
Applying it.
Meryl Streep is applying it, but there's a point where Meryl Streep is trying to develop it for that character. That happens behind the scenes. It happens before the movie starts being created. And she's trying to understand this character and how this character would react in a bunch of different situations. She's developing her empathy there.
I see. So she's really like studying the person, maybe looking at videos or reading about them to really kind of absorb that, and then I see.
Yeah. Or if it's a documentary, she's reading all the biographies or actual footage or things that person wrote. That's developing empathy. Yeah.
We're kind of coming to more to the close. Is there kind of an area that we haven't covered that you think would be really good to explore?
I think we've got it all.
Okay. Well, the big part was definitions. Maybe we should have started with that, like kind of rush through it, because there is, like I was saying, you do have. I imagine you'll be giving a lot more talks about this now. There was a talk I saw that you gave at a UX conference in Switzerland, I think it was, and you really systematically lay out some of your views, and I imagine you'll be doing more of that. This is our dialogue here is a bit more of a rambling, kind of exploration. So I'd recommend anybody, to go see those other videos, and of course to get the book as well. And is this book still available online? It was it was on a website, and on that website you can get a 10-day free trial, and you can read the book, get a start on the book there. Do you know if that's still available?
I don't know what website you're talking about.
Okay.
It's available on Amazon, and it's available via the publisher's website, Rosenfeld.
Okay. It could have been their website then.
Yeah.
So.
Don't know.
Well, great. Well, I appreciate this time to share this. I just really, the work that you do is, like I mentioned, you really dig into things, and so you've really brought up a lot of really interesting kind of aspects of it, and then, really interesting organization of the material. I still have a little bit of that difference. I'm, like I said, into that empathic way of being, and this. I think we need to transform corporations instead of, but I guess that's a different topic as well.
Well, it's getting underway. It won't happen overnight.
Okay, well, I'll just end